Shalom Nukulam. Hello, everybody. My name is Paul Gross. I'm a senior fellow at the Menachem Begin Heritage Center. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to one of our regular webinars. Is actually a little irregular because this was not part of our original schedule. You won't need me to tell you that things have changed significantly for all of us in Israel and the Jewish world, and I'd argue in the Middle East and perhaps in the world these last few days. And we wanted to bring an expert, an analyst that can bring us up to speed with what's going on, maybe get behind some of the headlines that we've all been reading, and explain some of the things that may be a little unclear for some of us. And I'm going to speak to him for half an hour or so, and then there'll be about 20 minutes for you to ask your questions. So write your questions in the chat. You can write them as they come up, and I will turn to them when I've finished with my questions. So we are really delighted and very privileged to have with us Yaakov Katz, who's an author and journalist, currently a senior fellow at the Jerusalem People Policy Institute here in Jerusalem. Between 2016 and 2023, he was editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post, where he continues to write a weekly column. He also has a regular column for Newsweek and the Jewish Chronicle in London. He's the host of the JPPI weekly podcast. He appears regularly on CNN and BBC as an analyst on Israel affairs. And I'll just say on a personal note, doing an amazing job doing that. You should check him out online if you haven't seen him. He's the author of 3 books: Shadow Strike, Inside Israel's Secret Mission to Eliminate Syrian Nuclear Power; Weapon Wizards, How Israel Became a High-Tech Military Superpower; and Israel versus Iran, The Shadow War, very relevant for us. And his next book, titled While Israel Slept, is scheduled for publication in the fall of this year. He, prior to taking up the role of editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post, he also served for 2 years as a senior policy advisor to Naftali Bennett, while Bennett was Israel's Minister of Economy and Minister of Diaspora Affairs. He's originally from Chicago. He has a law degree from Bar Ilan, and he lives here in Jerusalem with his wife and 4 children. And Yaakov Katz is taking a break from his wife and 4 children, who he's only just seen, having just got back to Israel, to join us on Zoom. So, Yaakov, thank you very much for lending us your time.
Paul, great to be with you.
Okay, let's start at the beginning, so to speak. Let's recap. So for those of us in Israel, and the audience contains people here in Israel and outside. For those of us in Israel, we were woken up late Thursday night, or actually early Friday morning, by a siren. And it wasn't the usual siren telling us that missiles were on the way or rockets were on the way, but rather a siren to tell us that something big had happened and we should all be on alert. And basically, the security situation in Israel had changed significantly as a result of what Israel was doing in Iran. So can you tell us, what was Israel doing in Iran on Thursday night, Friday morning last week?
Well, first of all, it's great to be with the Begin Center, and I think there's probably no center that better exemplifies what Israel's doing, because this is, in fact, the living illustration of what is famously known as the Begin doctrine. The bombing in 1981, in order that was given by Menachem Begin, who was then prime minister, of the Osirak reactor, and the idea that Israel cannot live with an enemy state, one that openly calls for its destruction to obtain nuclear weapons, was something that Menachem Begin famously understood back then in 1981 and took action to prevent. So it was him who, I say, paved the way for what we are now doing as a country. Israel, for the historical context, I think it is important to just keep in mind that Iran has long been the primary threat to Israel. And this stems from 2 primary factors. The first being that this is a country that is the greatest state sponsor of terrorism. It tried, and we saw what happened on October 7th, it tried to create a belt of fire surrounding Israel with Hamas, with Hezbollah in Lebanon, with the Houthis in Yemen, and other terrorist organizations that it has long supported. That was one aspect of Iran. The other aspect of Iran was its continued pursuit of a nuclear capability, something that started about 30 years ago. Even before, it started actually under the Shah, before the Islamic Revolution of 1979. Then it was at a time that Israel and America were both allies with the Iran as a country. And that, of course, changed with the rise and the return of Khomeini from Paris, from exile back in 1979. And after a few years, the shift and the idea that the nuclear program could be used as a way to bolster deterrence, to create power, and to ensure the survival of the regime. But what made Iran such a threat for Israel, and I think the way to look at this is to contrast it, for example, with Pakistan. Pakistan is a country that is in a Muslim state that has nuclear weapons. Why is Pakistan not a concern for us? Why are we not worried about Pakistan? Because this isn't about nuclear weapons per se. This is about the combination of nuclear weapons in the hands of a regime that openly calls for our destruction. That was this case with Saddam. That was the case with the Al-Kibar reactor in Syria, destroyed by the government of Ehud Olmert back in 2007. And that is the case with the Iranians ever since they fast forwarded their nuclear program under the leadership of the Ayatollahs. That is what made this the potential existential threat. So finally, on Friday morning, after years of talking about the need to neutralize this threat, Israel finally took action. Now, the question really is, why did Israel decide that now is the time? We're bogged down in a war in Gaza, with drags on. We have hostages that have yet to come home. And I'll be frank and honest, and I don't know if this has happened to other people on this call, but today I went for a walk early in the morning here in Jerusalem, and I passed by a bus stop and saw the posters of the hostages, and my heart broke for a moment because I had not thought of them since Friday. And I don't know if other people feel the same way, but we've been just so distracted, and this is still such an issue that we cannot forget, right? So we have all these reasons why open up another front with a country that has the ability, as we just saw a few moments ago, to fire five or seven more ballistic missiles into central Israel. I think that there were a number of factors that led to this moment and why now was the time, or is the time, for Israel to act. The first is that belt of fire that I mentioned. That group of the army of proxies is no longer what it once was. If we go back to October 6, 2023, it was powerful. It was mighty. It had us scared. But in the almost 2 years now since the Hamas invasion on October 7, Hamas still exists, still has hostages, but they have no ability to attack the Israeli home front. Hezbollah still exists, still has weapons, but they have themselves declared that they will not be getting involved. The Assad regime, an ally of Iran, now gone. And the weapons that the Syrian military had in the 4 days after Assad was toppled as the Ashara HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Shams, his militia and now government, as they barreled through the country, Israel destroyed, if you remember, in a span of just 72 hours, all of the strategic weapons of the Syrians, from their air force to their navy, to their Scud missiles, to their chemical weapons. So when you think about this region, you say, 1 second, we don't have what to fear as much as the past. The repercussions of an attack will not be what they would have been, let's say, in October 6th, or even right after October 7th. And there was another factor. And that is that Israel twice in last year, in April and in October, it exchanged blows with the Iranians, and we neutralized their sophisticated advanced S-300 Russian-supplied SAMs, surface-to-air missile systems. What this did is it opened up the skies. This was intentional. We now know this was extremely intentional. But Israel was slowly taking some pieces off the chessboard to allow for one day to pave the way for what we saw happen on Friday morning. And then the third, I'd say, big change was the election of Donald Trump in November and his taking up of the Oval in January of this year. And this was a change, not that Joe Biden was anti-Israel, and we don't have to get into all of that. There's definitely lots of criticism of Joe Biden. But Joe Biden did not see Iran the same way that Netanyahu does, the same way that most of Israel does, and definitely not like Donald Trump. And we all know that when Donald Trump took office, he did want to try to make a deal, and he tried. And Israel gave him the space and time for that. But it became very clear that Israel was contemplating and thinking about taking military action. The Trump administration did want some time. We now know that they were in on it to some extent, and this was a joint effort in deception. But I actually wrote a piece in the Jerusalem Post in Friday's paper. So I published it, I wrote it Thursday to appear in the print edition Friday morning. We all heard that stuff was happening. I had no clue what was going to happen just hours later, but my headline was along the lines of Israel has a moment now to attack Iran and should not miss it. And just simply put, not that I had any insider who was telling me it's going to happen, get ready, but you just look at how the stars aligning and the reality and the situation, and you could not ignore the fact that this was a unique opportunity and Israel had to take it. Not to mention the fact that we now know in the aftermath that Netanyahu has claimed that Israel has intelligence, that they were fast forwarding the weaponization program. So remember, a nuclear weapon or a nuclear weapons program requires three key ingredients or three components. Component number one is fissionable material. So that could either be plutonium or uranium. The Iranians have built both tracks, but they haven't really invested too much in the plutonium track. They had a facility, we have since, I think, destroyed it, called Arak, A-R-A-K, where they built a heavy water reactor to potentially one day refine plutonium, another way to build a bomb. They focused most of their efforts, if not all, on uranium enrichment. Those are the centrifuges, those steel machines that spin around with UF6, that's the uranium gas form, and enrich it to, they got close to military grade uranium. The second component that you require is the warhead itself, right? So you take that uranium, you have to install it in a warhead. You have to create the explosion that creates that nuclear blast. But the third component, which is just as important, which we know that the Iranians already have had for a long time, is the delivery system. How do I transport that bomb to the person or to the country or to wherever it is, the location of where I want it to go? And those are their ballistic missiles, which we're getting a taste of now in these last, 5 days, 6 days. So they were very close. We know for sure on two tracks, the delivery system they already had. The uranium, they were up to 60%, a jump from 90 to 90% within days, enough of a quantity for 9 to 10 nuclear bombs. The weapons program, now Netanyahu says there was this special intelligence. Obviously, I haven't seen it. We're not going to see it, but I do believe my government in cases like this, and I think this was the right move.
Yeah, and it is actually quite it's quite telling how united it seems that the country is on this, because especially considering, the day before the country was divided on all manner of things, and not least on the war in Gaza and whether to continue with that or go to a hostage deal. All those things that we're now, as you say, not talking about right now. And the country was divided on those things, and the government itself is obviously a very divisive government. We don't need to get into that, but certainly plenty of people aren't fans of this prime minister and this government. And yet the country, I think, is really united around this issue. And you hear it also from opposition politicians who come out, Lapid and Gantz and others who come out and say, we're standing foursquare behind the government on this. And you really haven't heard that kind of consensus talk, I think, since I can't even remember. It's quite extraordinary. And can you tell us what is Israel actually targeting? Because we know, as you said, we're going after the nuclear facilities, but we're also targeting the missile silos, and as we know, and in quite dramatic ways, individuals, people. Can you tell us who and what Israel is going after there?
So first of all, I totally agree with what you just said, Paul. And someone today was saying to me, Bibi's doing this to ensure his political survival, and this was all about politics and to save his government from falling because of the Haredi, the ultra-Orthodox draft issue and the vote that came up last week. And my answer to that is, look, two things. One is I'm no fan of Bibi. But this is an issue that really strikes at the core existence of the state of Israel. This isn't about politics. This is about taking advantage of a historic window of opportunity that any prime minister, I think, would have done. And any prime minister would have tried to do at least. Number two is, like you said, Paul, Lapid has come out and said, I stand by the prime minister. But Lapid even said more than that. I'm a bitter political rival of Bibi. But on this issue, I stand completely shoulder to shoulder with him. I mean, as Gantz has, as Yoav Gallant, as Lieberman, there's no one who's against this idea because they all understand the reality. To your question, Israel went into this, and I hear a lot of people who have said to me, but Yaakov, we haven't really caused enough damage yet to the nuclear program. True, but intentional also. When Israel embarked on this operation, it had three categories of targets. Category number one, which was the initial focus, definitely for the first 72 hours, or the 48 hours, was the surface-to-air missile systems. Israel needed to clear the skies, and we have obtained aerial sovereignty. Now, let me ask the people here on this call. If I had told you a few months ago, a year ago, 2 years ago, that Israel, country of 10 million people, 2,000 kilometers away, would be able to fly to a country that's 10 times our size, right? I'm throwing that out there. I don't know their landmass versus our landmass, but it's quite very extensive and much, much, much bigger. And we would be in a country of 70 million plus people, 7 times our size. And we would be able to fly there like we want, when we want, how we want, where we want. I mean, it's almost unbelievable that we're able to pull that off. I mean, that's remarkable that the Israeli Air Force has been able to do that. Now, that's not enough, but that's huge because now think of what that means. If there is no threat to aircraft, and by the way, bli ayin hara, right? Thank God, not a single aircraft has been shot down. I mean, that's also pretty remarkable when you think about this. I remember the years back in the 2010s. A few times I was in Air Force offices and they were laying out the maps and showing us what would happen one day if Israel attacked Iran. And the prediction and the assumption was that we were going to lose pilots. We were going to lose aircraft. Baruch Hashem, that hasn't happened. But we can't take that for granted. This is tremendous, right? So that was target category one. Target category two was the ballistic missiles and the more of the focus on the launchers. We wanted to degrade their ability to strike back at us. Going into this, they were believed to have several thousand, 2,000 to 3,000. Figure that on the launchers, it's usually about 1 to 10, 1 to 20, right? It's not 1 to 1. You don't have a launcher for every missile. You have a launcher for about 10 to 20 missiles. So we've been able, as of yesterday, it was a third of the launchers. The number has since gone up. But we've been able to take out a lot of the launchers, which means it's much more difficult for them to launch. One of the things that they are doing is they're now actually trying to hide their launchers. Some of them are on flatbed trucks. They're hiding them inside urban centers and they're trying to, pop them out. By the way, they're having difficulty. We see that. I mean, look at how much time you're spending in the bomb shelter. Thank God, again, bli ayin hara, as we say in Hebrew, al tiftach pelas satan, right? Don't open your mouth to the Satan. Don't say anything that will lead to bad things happening. But the rocket fire is declining. The amount of time we're spending in bomb shelters is declining. And let's also not forget that the interception rate is remarkable as well. Now, I know that's hard to square when we think about the fact that one missile killed, 8 people in Petah Tikva on Saturday night, right? And we've had Bat Yam and Ramat Gan and other places that have been hit, and that's true. And that's just unfortunate. And these are big missiles that carry half a ton of explosives, and this is what happens when a missile lands. But we've been able to strike and intercept 90% of them. So out of the 400 or so, except for 40 that have impacted Israel. We together with the Americans have intercepted all of them. I mean, imagine if we didn't have these interception systems, we didn't have missile defense systems. What would be going on right now in our country? It would be a nightmare, right? I mean, that itself is that multi-layered system that we have. Most of what we're seeing is Arrow, Arrow 2, Arrow 3, and the American THAAD. But this is pretty remarkable in itself. So that was category 2. Also within category 2, I put in the decapitation of their military leadership. And this was meant to undermine their ability to retaliate and to respond. I don't know if anyone on this call ever saw the show Game of Thrones, but it was I watched it back in COVID. I caught up. I was a few years behind, but I caught up in like, what is it, 8, 9 seasons. Pretty crazy. But anyhow, there's an episode there that's called The Red Wedding. And the reason it's called The Red Wedding is there's some, I don't remember this family marrying that family, whatever, but they trick them, they poison them in the wine, and then they slaughter all the other side. That was the code name that was given by military intelligence here to that decapitation of the top military brass in Iran. We had intelligence on where a group of them were actually gathering, and were able to take out the head of the IRGC, the head of their land forces, the head of their air force, the head of their missile apparatus, the head of their intelligence. I mean, one after the other. This doesn't stop them completely, but creates great havoc and disruption. And then the third category is, of course, the nuclear facilities. So far, Israel has attacked and caused extensive damage in Natanz. That's the main enrichment facility. We still don't know exactly what is going on in the lower chambers, or at least it's not public. The IAEA, the UN's nuclear watchdog, speaks about how damage has been done to the centrifuges, irreparable damage, it says. There's thousands of centrifuges at Natanz. But we'll have to wait to see exactly what happened. Another facility and others that have been struck is Iraq, I mentioned, the heavy water, Parchin, which is a place where they're known to have worked on the weaponization program. Isfahan is where they do the conversion. So remember, uranium in its natural form is turned into gas at Isfahan. It's then fed to Natanz. And then from there, it goes, once it's refined to a higher level, it would go back to Isfahan and be turned back into metal. Metal, think of that kind of metal ball that you've seen in movies that makes the nuclear weapon. And then there's one more facility that we've yet to really deal with, and this is the one that everyone is talking about, and that is Fordow. It is a secret uranium enrichment facility near the city of Qom in Iran. It's a holy city to the Shia Muslims. It is buried deep inside a mountain. There's talk of it being over 100 meters beneath the ground. Very difficult. Israel does not have, as far as we know, the conventional ability to strike and penetrate Fordow. And that is part of the reason why we're hearing a lot about the prospect and possibility that the Americans will get involved and potentially do this. The Americans do have a weapon called the GBU-57. It's also known as the MOP, the Massive Ordnance Penetrator. You might know it by its name, Moab, the mother of all bombs, it sometimes is referred to. It is the largest conventional weapon that exists. It has about 15 tons of explosives, and it has the ability to really penetrate deep, deep, deep underground. A few of those would be able to take care of the business. Israel does not have aircraft. So people could say, why not just give us the weapon? We don't need an aircraft. Well, we don't have aircraft to carry those kind of weapons. There was years ago thought of maybe trying to convert a Hercules, a C-130 that we have, what we in the Air Force call the Shimshon, and try to see if that could carry it. It probably wouldn't work. So absent us having some way, which I still don't know what that might be, we would need either the Americans or there are other options that we just don't know of. And I do hear of the defense. I heard the defense minister the other day say this will not end without us taking care of Fordow. So I want to believe that the strategy wasn't let's do what we'll do and then beg America to take care of Fordow. If that was, I don't know if that's the best plan, but I want to believe that Israel has some way that it can take care of something. And it might not be to destroy everything. Let's also remember that's a whole other part of this conversation is because if we look at previous models or previous instances when Israel destroyed another country's nuclear program, so you had Iraq and Syria, we talked about one facility once destroyed, that was it, we were done. But the idea here is that we can't, it's not one facility and it's not one bombing and it's not one off. So what are we actually talking about is extensive damage that delays them, but then something else will have to happen that will stop them from rebuilding.
So on the Fordo point, you said that the defense minister said that we will deal with Fordo, that we won't end this operation without dealing with Fordo. Would it be an option? Would one alternative path to success be that we don't deal with Fordo, but because of the incredible destruction that we've wrought on Iran, on Iran's infrastructure and personnel, that they go back to the negotiating table weakened, and they do some kind of deal with the Americans, which is far more concessionary, shall we say, far more something that we would want to see, giving up uranium enrichment, the kinds of things they were refusing to do before. Is that something that you think Israel is seeing as a possibility, or it's just not on the cards that Iran would do that?
I mean, look, the brinksmanship that we're now seeing and President Trump's saber rattling and warnings and, unconditional surrender and, he outlined a clear line in the sand last week already where he said, I will not allow enrichment. The Iranians have wanted to keep enrichment. This was what I think was the sticky point of the potential deal, was that the Iranians wanted to retain a domestic enrichment capability. Trump originally, if you remember, when the talks began, Witkoff himself, the special envoy, spoke about that maybe they'd be able to keep up some enrichment capability. He then walked that back. But it was interesting that Trump took the stance and the position that's long been Israel's position, which is they cannot be allowed to have any enrichment capability. That was one of the big flaws of the JCPOA, of the deal, that the nuclear accord that Barack Obama reached back in 2015. So the issue here is that if, let's say, the Ayatollahs came to Donald Trump right now and said, listen, we will stop, we will willingly dismantle. Similar, let's say, what Gaddafi did, not after a war, but in an attempt to normalize and improve relations with the West. We'll give you everything. We'll shut down the entire program. Stop the attacks on us. That might be a win, right? That's not something that I think Israel should necessarily say no to. If you have the right safeguards and if you have such an offer and a deal on the table, then that could be something that's worth exploring. But I don't know that will happen. And I don't know that the Iranians are able to make such a deal. They are a very proud country, and this regime has long sought nuclear weapons for a very important reason from their perspective, to ensure their survival, to ensure that no one could ever topple them. And to walk away and not have that, would be, I think, legitimately afraid that would expose them in a way that they don't want to be as exposed like that.
That's a nice segue into my final question before I go to the audience, which is, this is a very unpopular regime with its own people, as we've known for a long time, and there have been mass protests against the Iranian regime for several years, including protests in which the protesters are saying on banners and posters, stop spending billions of dollars on Hezbollah and Hamas and dealing with the Palestinians and the Lebanese, and spend it on infrastructure and welfare and everything here in Iran. And this isn't a popular regime. And there has been talk, I don't think by the Israeli government, but certainly by people around the Israeli government and certainly the United States, about regime change, not about the regime being toppled. Do you think this is, I guess, two questions, in your assessment, is this a likely, and B, something that you think the Israeli government is aiming for? is intending to precipitate?
So there is it likely? It's hard for me to estimate. I think it would
Right.
be hard for anyone to estimate. I
Right.
mean, I think that in reality, the Iran and the leadership are definitely more exposed and vulnerable than they were before. And there is a unique opportunity to take advantage of this weakness and their exposure and try to overthrow them and bring about a new leadership and a new government on the ground. And let's remember, we don't have a problem with the people of Iran. Our problem is with their oppressive leaders who have been holding them hostage. We share a long, rich mutual history with the Persian people as ancient peoples ourselves. And this what this government has done, this regime of the Ayatollahs, has basically prevented any relations between our countries, which we used to have. So I don't know, and it's difficult to predict. There's a lot that's simmering beneath the surface. People are fleeing cities. There's talk of maybe weapons and and units, army units that are kind of breaking ranks. It's very difficult to know.
Mm.
What I do know, though, is that I am a little scared or concerned, let's say, that there's something happening here called mission creep. When you have a mission, and your mission is the nuclear program and degrade the military, mostly the missile capabilities. And now you see it's going well. Iran is more a paper tiger than not. And you begin to think, 1 second, I can actually do more. I can bring down the regime. I can overthrow them. I think in cases like this, we should have tzniut. We should have some humility. I I would love to see them overthrown, but I don't know that Israel trying to engineer that happening is something that would necessarily be good and is something that would necessarily succeed. This has to come from within. It has to be done by the Iranian people themselves. So I would urge caution for us not to get too caught up in believing that we have the ability to manipulate the reality in a country that is far away with a lot more people than we have, and definitely a culture that we probably do not fully understand.
Okay. Yeah, humility is always good in these circumstances and not always in evidence. But let's go to questions. So actually, directly to that last point, Eric Passman says, without regime change, what will stop Iran from going back to the drawing board and secretly build a nuclear bomb and the missile technology to deliver it?
Again, I missed the last part.
Without regime change, what would stop Iran from going back to the drawing board and secretly building a nuclear bomb and the missile technology to deliver it? Like, would this all be for nothing?
Well, I think so. It's a very good question. I think there's two options. One is, and by the way, I mean, it's a very important point because Iran, unlike Iraq of 81 or Syria of 2007, was not relying on a foreign actor to build
Mm.
their nuclear infrastructure. They did it themselves. So even though Israel has now eliminated some of their most advanced and high level scientists,
Yeah.
they will rebuild if they want to, and they can. And by the way, historically speaking, you cannot stop a country from obtaining nuclear weapons if that's what they seek. There's only two cases of countries that have dismantled willingly, and that is South Africa and Libya. Every other country that has sought to have this weapon ultimately gets it. And we saw that with Pakistan, we saw that with India, we saw that with North Korea, we saw that with our own country, the state of Israel, allegedly. And we've seen that also with Iran as it has gotten much closer. So I think that that's important to understand. To the issue, the Iranians want to rebuild, they will. So we have to stop them. Now, there's two ways to basically do that. One is we've opened up the skies. We keep attacking, right? We keep preempting based on intelligence and based on what we see. We don't let it grow back. That's not a good thing necessarily to be engaged in a long, stretched out campaign. Uh, it won't be good for Israel. And ultimately, I think it'll wear us down, and it will not necessarily stop the Iranians.
Mm.
Second way to do this, and this will be the more effective way, absent or minus regime change, is a deal, is the Americans, to get the Iranians to understand that they cannot rebuild. And that is why we do need the US and why this all has to be so closely coordinated with the US. Because it's not just about the military potential partnership and the moves that the Americans might make. This is more so about the day after, which is just as important.
There's a question here from Ronnie Phillips who asks, can a ballistic missile shoot down a plane, a passenger plane? And is Ben Gurion Airport very vulnerable? And maybe I'll just add on to that, that of course, one of the costs that we're paying at the moment is that the airport is shut down, and not only foreign airlines have cancelled, as many have done since October 7th, but also even El Al is not flying at the moment. We can't. There's no one flying out in and out of Israel. So is it a how serious is this threat, potential threat or fear of a ballistic missile hitting a passenger jet?
I mean, look, it definitely exists. I can't say it doesn't. You can be flying on a plane. I mean, let's remember how ballistic missiles go. They take off, they exit the atmosphere, and they come back down. If that missile is coming down at the same time that a plane is passing by and it hits that plane, that is something that could definitely happen. What are the chances that a ballistic missile is going to hit my house? Or what are the chances that a ballistic missile was going to hit that house in Petah Tikva? Very, very small when you calculate the interception rate of the arrow. You consider how big the country is and where they're going to land. It's terrible luck. So could that happen? Definitely. Is it likely? No. But this is why, the reason that Ben Gurion has actually been closed is less because of that, of a ballistic missile hitting a plane. It's more because of a ballistic missile hitting the airport at a time that people are there. And a lot of people get off a plane, you suddenly have hundreds of people in one place. And based on the current rules, we're avoiding having people congregate in one place. But there's another reason, and that is that when a plane is in the air, you now have to be very careful with your interceptors. So if they suddenly, at the same time as that plane is coming in for landing, missiles start to come from Iran, you might not be able to intercept every one of those because one of your interceptors might actually hit the plane. So they wanted to keep the skies clear to just be able to intercept and focus on what they needed to do. By the way, that's why I took a boat back from Cyprus to get back to Israel on Sunday night. And because there weren't, planes were not an option. That's why people are flying into Amman or Aqaba or Sharm el-Sheikh. Now today they did renew some of the flights and they're trying to bring people back, but it's moving a little slowly. I did see a report earlier that because it was relatively quiet today and it was done efficiently, they might actually double the number of planes tomorrow to bring people home.
Yeah, I saw that's happening. You made the point about that. It's kind of dumb luck if the missile hits this or that, and it's a question actually: to what extent is Iran targeting anything? Because obviously the Iranians, unlike Israel, don't care about Israeli civilians dying. So that's a win for them. But are they also not just randomly throwing them at Israeli population centers, but actually targeting things in Israel?
Yeah, oh, definitely. They
Okay.
are targeting sensitive infrastructure. I'm sure you all heard and saw of the attack on the Bazan gas refinery installation in Haifa, where 3 workers were killed on Saturday night. Or Sunday night, was it? But I forget the days at the moment, but there were 3 people who were killed there. They're targeting intentionally the center of the country. There is the Mossad headquarters just north of Tel Aviv, near Galilot Junction. There's the Kiryat military headquarters in the center of Tel Aviv. They've been aiming a lot at the 2 of those. And the reason there are lots of rocket sirens lately in the south near Beersheba is they are also targeting Air Force bases in the south. Um, Israel, I'm just thinking how to say this. Some of these facilities have been hit, and Israel intentionally does not say which and does not say how and does not say in what barrage, because we obviously, you can all imagine, we do not want them to know which of their missiles pointed in which direction and which one worked and which one was able to hit which facility. So there's a very careful censorship, military censorship in place to prevent the publication as much as possible of the location of the missiles that do impact and hit Israel.
There's a follow-up question here from Marnie who says, are they also targeting the, in air quotes, textile factory in Dimona?
Yes, they are. Yeah.
Okay.
There is significant missile defense around there.
I would imagine.
In the Kiryat itself, it was quite remarkable to see, but Israel has also deployed its own an Iron Dome battery inside the Kiryat.
Right, this is the Defense Ministry building.
This is, the big Defense Ministry compound and military headquarters in Tel Aviv. That's a last-ditch effort. If you already have a ballistic missile that's about to land, you can try to take it out with Iron Dome, but it's going to be too tough. But I mean, they're taking they're going to great lengths to try to protect the critical assets of this country.
I mean, the Iranians obviously have a limited number of, I mean, a lot of ballistic missiles, but a finite number of ballistic missiles, and we have successfully taken out some portion of that. I don't think a majority, but some portion of that. So, I mean, how long can the Iranians keep doing this? And is there? It seems to me that, and not just to me, that the number of missiles in each salvo, in each barrage, is less than it was. So they don't seem to be doing, I don't want to tempt fate. They have, in the last couple of days, they haven't seemed to be doing the massive bombardments they did at the beginning, in which the entire country was running to the shelters. They've been doing is that because they're running out and they need to preserve their stockpile?
I think it's more that they are having difficulty launching them. Because Israel has been able to destroy many of those launchers, it's becoming harder for them to launch, and for them to launch in a way that we're not going to intercept. There have been numerous cases of where we've detected launchers on the ground with missiles ready to be launched, and we've been able to destroy them while they're still in Iran. They recognize this, and this makes it more difficult because of what I mentioned before, the aerial superiority and the control of the airspace. We now have drones up there all the time that are hunting and are watching and are looking and are gathering intelligence. And that's been quite effective. Again, it's not enough. There's no such thing ever as 100% defense. Never. But if the combination of missile defense that we have here and the aerial superiority and those drones and the missile and the intelligence collection and the interdiction of those trucks and launchers before they are used has been successful in putting it all together and really minimizing this threat. Again, bli ayin hara. I don't want to sound too I don't want hubris before this is all over, sure. But so far it does look like this is going in a good direction in that sense.
Okay. There's a question here from Lauren about international involvement. She mentioned specifically Russia or Qatar as two countries that are both involved with, have good relations with Iran, and also, so it seems, have good relationships, personal relationships with Trump. Could they influence Trump in this matter? That's the question.
Yeah, I mean, listen, Trump has to make decisions that are based on what's in the interest of the United States, right? And he's going to be taking a lot of different opinions on that. And that's why I really say it's difficult to know where this will go with him, because I could see him doing something. I could see him also not doing anything. We also have to remember that Trump attacking would lead potentially to attacks on the UAE, the Saudis, American facilities and bases and presence in the region, using the Iranian Navy to wreak havoc on trade and shipping lines in the Persian Gulf. So this is something that, obviously Trump needs to consider. We don't necessarily think about. We're like, just do it, get it over with. But there's a lot more that needs to be considered. I think with regards to Russia, the Russians we saw that call that took place between Putin and Trump earlier. I think it was already on Friday or Saturday when this all began. And Putin has a definite interest in Iran. They have become closer during the period of the war in Ukraine and have supplied the Russians with drones and other technology. The Chinese get a lot of oil from the Iranians. The Indians get oil from the Iranians. Chinese are not, we have relations with them in economic relations. I wouldn't call them necessarily a friend. The Indians are a friend to Israel. And that's an issue that they continue to buy that oil. But I wouldn't be worried that the Russians are going to get involved in this. The Qataris also, let's remember, they are a nation that always does what's best for them. They adapt very quickly. They're like chameleons. So, they see the tide shifting. They're now suddenly quiet. When was the last time you heard from them, right? They were in the headlines every day, and now they've gone off of the radar because they're waiting to see where it's all going to go. And you know what? If there is regime change, Paul, and Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has to leave Iran, you can be sure that he probably has a nice villa waiting for him right next door to Khalid Mashal from Hamas in Doha. They'll be able to play squash together in retirement in Qatar.
Yes, well, I'd rather he's there than running Iran for sure. I know that you have to do a hard stop at 10:02. Maybe we'll just ask this, and you can answer this very quickly. Jonathan asked about. I mean, we talked about the finite number of Iranian missiles. Is Israel running out of interceptors for the Arrow system? Is that something we need to worry about?
We should be worried. Yeah, I mean, there was a report today in the Wall Street Journal citing U.S. sources that Israel was beginning to run out, and these aren't unlimited. It's not an unlimited resource. Each of these missile interceptors of the Arrow costs about $1 million. When you think about the scale of one of those interceptors versus an Iron Dome, the Tamir interceptor, which used to be 100,000, it's a little less now apparently. That's a big difference. I mean, how many would we be able to have to begin with? We have to be careful and use them wisely, but it's not going to be an endless resource. And hopefully, I'm sure we have a nice amount still left, but this isn't something that can just go on indefinitely. And that will be one of the considerations.
Okay. Yaakov Katz, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you all.
For enlightening us. Thank you everyone for joining. We have in 2 weeks, actually, Wednesday, 2 weeks today, we have another webinar focused specifically on the US-Israel side of this. And next week, we're trying to get something organized for next week. That may or may not happen, but certainly in 2 weeks we have. So check our website for details, our Facebook page. You can also email me if you're not on my mailing list. Email me, paulg@begincenter.org.al. I'm going to write it into the chat for those that don't have it. But yeah, in 2 weeks' time, we'll be talking very specifically about the US side of this, what it means for the US-Israel relationship, what's going on inside America, inside the Republican Party, and the divisions there as well, which I think is also very interesting and very relevant. So there's my email address. Email me if you're not on my mailing list and you would like to be, to get details of English events, both virtual and hopefully soon again in person. For those of you in Israel, stay safe. Listen to the Pikud Oref, the Home Front Command instructions. Get to your shelters when you need to. And I will see you all soon. Bye-bye.